You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It's Thursday, December 26th, 2024. It's 7:38 p.m. Pacific time. And I thought what I would do tonight is talk about one of these popular ideas that we have, which is called, in a colloquial sense, parentification of children during childhood. If we were to reflect on that in attachment terms, what we would really be talking about is involving role reversing. That's what we talk about. Involving is a little bit different than what you might think of parentification, or we used to call it getting spoused. But when the child becomes concerned about the mind state of the caregiver, uh, uh, we call that involving. And what that means is that the caregiver is involving the child in the regulation of their mind state, so that the child then has to pay attention and moderate their responses based on their interpretation of what the mind state of the caregiver is in that moment. That's making sense. Role reversing is actually where the caregiver uh, represents themselves as helpless, and the child has to take over that role of, in some sense, directing or controlling. And because the involving and role reversing can affect any of the attachment strategies, it appears differently depending on what the rest of the constellation of factors is, rather than that simply being a conclusion in and of itself. Secure people, natively secure people can also have involving role reversing. Dismissing adults also have that involving role reversing. Preoccupied people have it. Disorganized people can have it. And it just appears differently depending on what the underlying conditions of the rest of the childhood are. And so what we would be talking about is also the neglect aspect and also the rejecting aspect of the relationship with the caregiver. And then depending on what the combination of that is really what defines what the outcome of the attachment response would be. Um, when we look at this, we're also talking about mentalizing in a way, or the non-mentalizing modes. We have psychic equivalence as a non-mentalizing mode, which is where you think that your experience of what's happening is universal and that everybody's having the same experience that you're having, so that you feel confident in assigning meaning to other people's experience. Uh, that is to say, I'm having this experience. This is what's going on. That means when you respond in the way that you do, I can assign a meaning to your response without actually inquiring what meaning you intended in your expression. That makes sense. It also is associated with pretend mode. Pretend mode is where you read the mind state of somebody else. That's the involving part, and you present yourself to them in the way that you uh, imagine they would want you to be, so that you will be acceptable to them. That's pretend mode. And in pretend mode, which is more associated with preoccupied people, you pretend to be who you think somebody else wants you to be in order for them to accept you. There's a difference in the way that dismissing people use pretend mode. It's more idealization for them. And idealization also involves, in some sense, mind reading, or involving yourself in the mind state of somebody else so that you can present the version of reality the way that they like it presented. And there's often a stripping out of any kind of negative affect in that. You become and present to the caregivers what it is that they want, or one of them, what it is that they want. Both of these are quite transactional in the sense that you present what they want, and so that they'll give you what you want. In the uh, dismissing side of things, it's in this idealizing version of everything is the best, everything is the greatest, everything is awesome. And really what you're reflecting back to the caregiver is that the caregiver's parenting, the caregiver's care for the child is always really good. There's never any room for anything else in the way that is, which supports the parental belief that they're really good parents and that they have a great child. It often means that the child does not present authentically what their needs are, so that they also seem to be well-behaved children who are not demanding of the caregivers particularly. Preoccupation, because it splits, one side is helpless and one side is controlling. The controlling piece doesn't really kick in until around 6 years of age, when the brain develops enough that a child can actually begin to do that. And that's really when the role reversing could kick in, was when the child can take over some of the care. The caregiver becomes the receiver of care, and the child becomes the provider of care. This is not so much true of dismissing people, because it's much more transactional. The dismissing person presents themselves in the way that the caregiver wants, in this idealized version, but they're getting a direct benefit from that. Whereas in the preoccupied side, it's more implicit. The caregiver, the child presents themselves in a way that they hope that the caregiver will like. Um, and because the caregiving is so chaotic, it's very hard for them to predict what that might be. And so if the caregiver is responsive to a child's helpless presentation and provides care for the child, then they become helpless. But if the caregiver doesn't, then the child becomes controlling in order to try and get the care from the caregiver. In the disorganized end of it, because children are so frightened of the caregiver, usually, and it's almost always the case that they're frightened of the caregiver, they're always trying to understand what state the caregiver is, so that they can either get out of the way or present themselves in the way that they need to, so that the caregiver will not react in a way that's frightening to the child. And even in some in secure the secure constellation, that involving can happen, where you're concerned about the the mind state of the caregiver, so that you can be adaptive to it. Um, One additional factor here is the rejection aspect of it, which is if the caregiver is also rejecting, on top of involving, it creates a passivity usually in you as a child. You don't present your needs, because if you do, they're rejected, but at the same time, you have to take care of the caregiver. So it creates a kind of passive preoccupation with the caregiver. So that's the ground, as we would say. The path then is, when you find yourself in that circumstance, and remember that this happens very early on in childhood, this process of being involved. Uh, by the time a child, of course, is 6, their brain is developed enough that they can really respond to the role if they need to, and really be constantly monitoring of it. I remember the first time I had an awareness of this. I think I was probably 7 or 8, and my older brother would have been so 10 or 11 at that point. And when I got home and I was walking up to the back door, I saw him standing there looking in the window, and I knew exactly what he was doing, which he was trying to see what state my mother was in before he went into the house. And so I just stood next to him and said, how is she? And he said, I haven't seen her yet. And then he said, if she's really bad, I just sneak in the house and go upstairs to my room and pretend that I'm not home, uh, which I thought was also quite an interesting thing. So that it doesn't have to be overt in the sense that the parent is directly demanding that you pay attention, but you learn as a child by observation how you have to respond. Of course, what this is essentially a denial of your authenticity, right? Your authentic expression. So what you learn in a childhood circumstance like that is that you can't actually express yourself authentically, and you have to be malleable and adaptable in who you're presenting yourself to be. On the dismissing side of things, there's more consistency so that you learn who it is that you need to be in order to satisfy the demands of the caregiver. So you develop this false persona, which actually can be quite elaborately developed, this false sense of self that you use as a way of eliciting a response. This is quite different than the way that it appears with preoccupied people because the caregiver's response is so chaotic and unpredictable. You don't develop a particular uh, uh, false self to respond to that. You just sort of throw stuff at the wall. It's like, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks. Do you remember that method of determining whether spaghetti was al dente? You throw it at the wall. If it's not cooked enough, it falls right off. If you throw it on the wall, it sticks momentarily and slowly peels off. Then it's perfectly cooked. If you throw it at the wall and it just sticks, it's overcooked. So, so you're that constant preoccupation with the mind state of the other so that you know how to present yourself. And then the role reversing happens if the caregiver is going to is using a helpless strategy, then you have to step up and take on the controlling strategy in order to operate the adult world. Really, what the child is trying to do is to navigate their position as a child in the adult world by prompting the adult that they have to depend on to provide the support that they need. So is it the signing of the form or making sure that there's food in the house or making sure there's food on the table or the laundry is done at whatever level the helplessness takes hold. And then the child becomes demanding that the caregivers step up and provide the 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 level of care that they need. Sometimes children who are in that controlling mode adopt other groups so they perform in a way that will elicit that. For instance, they do very well in school if they can get a response from the school people. Even though the home is very chaotic, they manage to be able to do that so they can present themselves in a way that's of value. But this is interfering really with the development of exploration in the sense that they're not exploring the things that really matter to them, nor have they had the support to actually investigate what really matters to them. What they're doing is providing the the presentation that actually is going to elicit from somebody else the care that they want, depending on how they direct that, they may end up becoming quite accomplished in something that doesn't really resonate much, doesn't have a lot of meaning because it elicited a response from the people that they had around them to choose from. With the addition of rejection, what on the preoccupied side of things, we would call it passively preoccupied. It's almost as if you're living life behind a barrier, that all of the authentic experience is not really expressed outwardly. You might even think of a passively preoccupied person as dismissing because of the way that they're disengaged from interactions in the world. They don't really ever present anything because they're so prone to uh, anticipation of rejection. This is also Mudit.
George, could you define helplessness? Just a basic definition, because for me, that would imply a freeze response.
The passively preoccupied.
Um, right, that's the only definition of helplessness.
No, helplessness is where you pretend to have a problem that you need help solving. And so you
Oh.
go to somebody and solicit from them their help at solving a problem that you have. The thing that makes it helpless is it's not a real problem. You don't need help solving it, but you're using the presentation of needing help to solve a problem as a way of gaining proximity to somebody, gaining connection to someone. In the most common dynamic of that, you have a dismissing person and a preoccupied person. The preoccupied person presents a problem that isn't a real problem and doesn't need a real solution. And then the dismissing person presents an ideal solution to the problem, which is not a real solution, which is okay in that dynamic because the problem isn't real. So that it doesn't matter that the ideal solution is also not real. Is that making sense? If you were to do that, if a secure person came to you and they had a problem that they needed help solving and they presented it to a dismissing person, and the dismissing person presented a idealized solution to the problem and it didn't actually solve the problem, the secure person would have difficulty with that because they actually had a problem to be solved. And so that's one of the main reasons why dismissing people and secure people don't relate much, because the secure person is actually expecting a solution, whereas the dismissing person is just providing the feeling of the solution rather than an actual solution. That making sense? It doesn't
I've
matter.
noticed,
Go ahead.
sorry, I've noticed the helplessness in terms of one person who still does, tends to create questions, which are
Right.
just obvious questions, who already knows the answers, but I'm not sure why this person is repeatedly. I'm like, this is like obvious. Like, you already know this. Why are you? But I think what she's doing is um, expecting a response, a verbal response. It's almost like she wants to keep talking.
Right.
I'm not even sure if it's a physical closeness,
She wants continued proximity.
physical proximity.
Right. Which she then experiences as having if you're continuing to talk, which she would feel disconnected from if you're not. So, and because she's not, uh, and it could be he or she, obviously, because they aren't willing to express authentically the need for proximity, they do it through the helpless, I call it the helpless loop. They present the problem, you present the solution, they reject the solution and represent the problem. You present another solution, they reject it and represent the problem. And after a while, your mind is going, I've just offered 10 solutions and none of them have worked. They've either been tried before, it didn't work, or there's some reason why they won't work. And I am beginning to feel helpless, trapped in this dialogue that actually, when I think about it, doesn't even seem like a real problem. That would be a good description of the helpless loop. They don't see it as a failure because they don't need a solution to a problem. In fact, you could even say, so what did you do? And they could even tell you what they did to solve the problem before they presented it to you as a hypothetical. Um, But they experience it as successful because it's maintaining proximity. So in their mind, it's working because they're getting out of it what they want. But it's implicit because they haven't expressed what it is that they want. And so then once you pick up on it, you become increasingly frustrated with it because it's not actually what's happening.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I'm getting frustrated because I'm like, it's hard to continue the conversation because it's just the same basic, repeated, obvious questions that the other person knows. And I'm
Right.
like, I respond, but I would forget and I get frustrated and I would look away and keep. It's hard to engage
So
repeatedly.
this is my instant solution to the uh, uh, pretend loop. I have no idea. What are you going to do?
But this is not even the problem. These are just questions of like facts. Like what time
No,
is
I
the
know, but they want proximity. They don't care about the question. So why do all of the work of trying to engage the questions? Just say, I have no idea. What are you going to do? And they'll continue talking and they'll continue to have the connection, but you won't have to be frustrated by engaging in the pretend loop.
putting on them, putting it on them?
Yeah, they want to carry all of the conversation with pretend problems. Let them carry all of the conversation with pretend problems, and you can just be proximate to them, which is actually what they're looking for. They're going to be totally satisfied with it. Geez, I have no idea. What are you going to do? Or what did you do? Uh, Things like that, so that you don't have to. Uh, you offer a solution to a pretend problem which they reject. After a while, the rejection stacks up, right? You're experiencing the rejection over and over again because they can't allow you to find a solution to the problem because if you do, the connection is over. Is that making sense? So as soon as you have that sense of frustration arising, part of it is going to be that you no longer believe them, and part of it is going to be that they're projecting you over and over again. It's a terrible strategy. If you're preoccupied and you can begin to recognize that you're doing that, you should stop doing it as soon as you can because ultimately people will withdraw from you because the experience of it is so unpleasant. But because you've used it all your life and it was the thing that you had to do with your caregiver in order to get attention, in your mind, it is that it works because I get the attention, even though it is a terrible strategy for that. That's the helpless side. The controlling side is just rejection and you should do this, rejection and you should do this, which is still the same goal of proximity.